Hello, everyone. This is Vikram Prakash, and you are listening to Architecture Talk, that podcast that looks to advance the frontier of architectural thinking, and indeed, I think, tries to decolonize the discipline by making it more open to the contentions and arguments of thinkers from a variety of epistemological and disciplinary point of views. Today, I am talking to my friend Afroditi Psarra and her collaborator Audrey Desjardins. Both of them are associate professors in the School of Art, Artistry, and Design here at the University of Washington, and they have a fantastic practice building alternative technologies that respond to and critique the world of data and the world of technology via an artistic medium. Today I'm talking about their project, Soft Data and Commonwares. I asked them what soft data is, and I asked them what is the commons in the project that they are trying to assemble. They're a fascinating team, and I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Well, hi, Audrey and Afroditi. Welcome to Architecture Talk. Afroditi, you have been here on Architecture Talk once before. And I'm so glad to have you back. And this time you're here with your collaborator, Audrey Desjardins, who is also a digital artist, thinker, philosopher, creator, interrogating the complex intersections, I think, between data and real life. So welcome. And first of all, tell me, why are the two of you collaborating? Like, what, besides you love each other, I'm sure, but why? What is the motivation that brought the two of you together?
Yes, we do love each other. So I think this is a good start. If you are choosing a collaborator, you definitely want someone who you like to spend time together with. So I think that's important, but we didn't know that when we started to collaborate. We only knew of each other and of each other's work. And we started our collaboration a few years back on a project called Voices and Voids. You know, we were curious about reclaiming voice assistant data. And this project came up because there was a call for a grant. And I think I reached out to Afroditi, or she reached out to me. And we thought maybe this is kind of the intersection between potentially performance and data and design research questions. And of course, there was Bonnie Whiting, who is a speaking percussionist, who's a professor in music, who also was part of our collaboration.
So performance and data. So tell me specifically, like you were dancing and there was data swirling around you. What was going on?
We sometimes that was the case. So most of the work was working with existing data archives that we gathered from people who shared their, sometimes year-long voice assistant data with us. And so we created 12 or 13 vignettes that was trying to transpose, transcode, reclaim, revisit this data in many, many different forms. And so sometimes it was dance. We collaborated with a choreographer and a few composers as well. I think it was really an exploration of how many ways can we transform this data so that we might understand it differently?
That's it. But somehow this all led to this current collaboration, which is this intersection or sort of the transformation, I guess, of what you're calling soft data into common wares. Yes?
Yeah.
So first tell me, what is soft data versus hard data?
Good question. I think for us, calling data soft data was a way to acknowledge how personal data can be and is in many times, and to acknowledge how much interpretation is happening in that data, the very subjective and human side that data has. And so I think
You're talking about
wait,
bias in data, or you're talking about
sure.
us interpreting data? So
I
you,
mean,
you say you
both.
think bias is soft, is the soft part of data.
I mean, it definitely it is included, I think, in our definition of soft data. But I think that even when we perhaps think that we don't have bias and are interpreting data, which of course isn't really possible, there's always bias.
Yeah.
Then of course it's soft. As soon as it's human, I think it's soft. But I also think, like, and Aphrodite, maybe you can jump in also. I don't necessarily position soft data in opposition to hard data. It's almost like I don't really want to think about hard data, more that my attention
Interesting.
is on the soft side. And I know, there is big data, I think maybe is a term that I would maybe say is closer to this hard data side of things. I don't know,
Yeah,
Aphrodite.
I mean, like big data is big money,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
we all know that. There are like 15 new positions on our campus at the University of Washington on big data, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if big data is big money, soft data is what?
I was thinking about that a lot the other day, and I was like, well, maybe soft data is just not about productivity. It's not about value in that sense of capitalism. It's
Right,
about meaning, and it's for you. And so it's not this like one-to-one comparison.
right, right. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that soft data, what I'm hearing you say, is got to do with the very personal,
Yeah.
in a sense. It's the sort of the experience of data. Is that reasonable to say? The experience of data? Is that a
I I mean,
legitimate phrase?
I like that phrase. I think for me, there's also, it encompasses the experience of collecting the data as well as then kind of looking at it, analyzing it, making sense of it, and living with it. So there's kind of these two sides, which I think are both experiential.
Mhm.
And however, a lot of the technologies that we have today maybe are not making that experience so present, right? Like it's very
Mhm.
common that you have that, like the collection of data being so recessed to the background that you don't notice it. And I think a lot of the work that I do and the work that Aphrodite does is in trying to clarify that this is happening and then to make it something that you can engage with.
Mhm. It reminds me of, I don't know, some old style psychoanalysis where Jacques Lacan used to talk about jouissance, talking about French terms as something that is to a certain extent in excess of, or at the sort of unincludable margins of the center, right? I mean, in a sense, the sort of a kind of experiencing of data that cannot be appropriated and completely captured by data.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the data that's captured about us and our homes and our private spaces and our private lives is something we never have access to and then never experience. And so in that sense, like it's this really, really big bubble that's really always there, but it's like just out of reach. You can't really get it or get to it
Mhm.
or get to know it. And so we're trying to get a little closer to that. But I feel like Aphrodite's been wanting to maybe add
Jump
something.
in, jump in,
Mhm.
Aphrodite.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, if you search for a definition of soft data online, it would be like in opposition to hard data, and it would be like data that are harder to quantify, I guess. But thinking about our two labs and our research and this project that we've been working on, basically what we want to say with this title is that even though data are considered as something that is characterized by precision and objectivity and perfection, or like very discrete numbers, we are interested in creating artifacts and technologies that embody this idea that the data that we collect and we examine can be messy, plural, very subjective, and very local.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think we've written a little bit about that in our the proposal for this grant that we initially asked for. And I think in relation to my lab, the DXR Soft Lab, this idea of softness has to do with materials and technologies that I use, like this field of soft circuitry, using fabrics, creating handmade electronics, wearable electronics, things that are closer to the body. And I think in the case of Audrey, she can jump in, but it also has to do with materials like paper, cardboard, postcards, sketches, narratives, imaginaries, and the conceptual ideas in our practice.
So there seems to be a lot of physicality in all of these things. Let me move this ahead and say, so how does this sort of translate into the idea of a commons or the commonware or a cultural commons? So which seems to be a very socious kind of a thing versus a sort of a experiencing body kind of thing. Or do I have that completely wrong?
Yeah, I think from the beginning, the goal of this project was to start to see connections between our labs and also beyond our labs. Like, who else would be interested in these conversations, and how can we make some of these reflections? Sometimes these reflections are material, clearly, but of course there's kind of the theory and the material, I think, for both of us really merges and kind of is interwoven. How can that become part of a conversation with more people? And so I think that first making that map and seeing how all of our work connects was an important point. But then the goal was always to then invite more people in.
But you're investing in the idea of the commons as a kind of an alternative to the data totalitarian universe. Is this reasonable?
Yes, I think, Aphroditi, feel free to jump in also. I think that the comments for me was both about like, how do we frame data and how do we understand data? But it was also in a way as in reaction to the typical ways we share knowledge in academia, which is so often behind paywalls, through conferences, through, these kind of really, there is specific language in which academia often, shares works. And so I think the common wares was, for me, about both these things.
I think, the idea of commons in our practice and in this project in particular has to do with the idea of building community, both at the local, very local level. Like, our labs are literally just sharing a wall. We're next to each other at the university, but also in the periphery of the city and beyond internationally, and seeing what sort of networks we can create and what sort of exchange of ideas we can create through this research project. So we're talking about things like participatory design, co-speculation, and the creation of open hardware. So this idea of like building future narratives or alternative narratives with others and creating tactics and tools for world building. I think that's where this idea of commons comes in. And the idea of wares, I think, again, it's something that it was kind of like a playful take on the idea of, again, the body, which is what my work engages with, and the home, which is what Audrey's work engages with, and this idea of like artifacts of the body and the home, like, for example, bodywear or Tupperware.
Or software.
Or software,
yeah, that's right.
So this is where this idea of wares comes in.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. No, I think I'm getting a sense of the landscape that you're dealing with. So let's look at this question of the relationship between big data and sort of engagement of experience, body, and common spaces as interactivity, as kind of a foil to the regimes of big data. Through looking at your specific collaboration, as a praxis beyond the specific content of the things that you're talking about, as a praxis of producing common wares.
Mm.
So from what I understand, you got a grant and then you produce this zine, which is a fascinating zine, which is sort of multiple voices and trajectories in it. But you kind of outline this zine on a beach in Greece, yes?
Yes.
So I'm very interested in the beach in Greece as a site of common wares. And tell me about that collaboration, what you did.
Well, the beach is, well, okay, so Aphrodite, her family has a place on Naxos Island in Greece. And
You were on the beach and making diagrams in the sand, from what I understand.
so Aphrodite very generously invited me there. And so, of course, I did not refuse. I said, absolutely, yes, I will join you in Greece. So every day we'd, eat breakfast and then make our way to the beach. We actually had made the outline. We had made that map that you're talking about that already connects all of our projects together and that already kind of pulls together a couple themes that we knew we wanted to talk about.
Wait,
So
you didn't make this map on the beach drawing?
We brought the map. We brought the map to the beach. The one that's on the wall there, that's embroidered, it's on fabric. There was no paper on the beach.
Okay.
It was the embroidered map. And so we had picked a couple of themes, or 3 or 4 themes that we knew we wanted to talk about. And I think in advance, we had written questions for each other in a Google Doc, actually, just so that, because of course we can talk for hours, but just to have a little bit of direction in terms of kind of pulling things out of those conversations. So we would pick one topic and then we'd start an audio recorder. On the beach, we had like our towels. There were rocks holding everything together so that the wind wasn't going to blow everything away. We had the map there that was a really good reminder for like what projects were connected to the themes we were discussing. And then we had our, relatively short list of questions. And we talked for an hour or 2 hours each of those times at the beach. And that became kind of the center for the zines afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, your question was...
I read this, as praxis of the things that you're talking about, because you needed Greece, you needed Naxos, you needed the old house, you needed the sunset, then you needed the walks down to the beach, then you needed the rocks on the towels, then you had the wind blowing through. So all these things are part of the praxis, yes? Or are they all the sort of pretexts to the real work?
I think they were, I don't know if they were the pretext, but they were certainly the context. Like we really needed to, I think for me, needed to be away from the studio, needed to be away from the computer, needed to be in a different space to have the ability to reflect on the work, because we're reflecting on like multiple years of work with multiple collaborators, many different projects. And so it's a hard exercise to reconnect all these things together and to kind of pull out some new definitions, maybe of data, some new views on our own practices and the practices we have with our students and collaborators. And so I think, I don't think we would have had the same zines if we hadn't been there.
Well, I'm just trying to make case for architecture. You realize that, I'm just trying to insert architecture as the precondition of your work, as the passe partout, the always already, which I think is kind of an interesting play in there. But you did, and then you kind of identified like 3 major kind of areas of your work. What are the 3 areas?
Yeah, gender and the body was the first one we talked about. Then we had earth, space, and body as a second one, which is very much about different scales. And then the last one we talked about was invisible data infrastructures. And to be honest, there were many other themes. We just didn't get to them yet. So the zine, of course, is an incomplete collection, which by definition, I think is, a lot of work. Feels like it could kind of keep going. Yeah, Aphroditi, do you want to say anything about the either our process or Greece?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this idea of like going on a retreat to be able to reflect on work that you've done previously, or like creating the preconditions to think critically or to write or to, I don't know, just go back to things that you've done in the past and re-examine them through a different perspective. I think it's absolutely necessary. I mean, this is something that people have been doing for ages, right? Like when you want to write, for example, you or when you want to produce work as an artist, you usually just go on a residency, or you create the time and the space where you can just focus on that specific thing you want to do for a certain amount of time without having any other distractions. And for us, I mean, going to Greece and doing this retreat, even though there were other distractions that were like, you know, it's summer and let's have fun and let's enjoy our time here, it was actually very refreshing to be in a very different environment from the, you know, the academic environment that we find ourselves in every day here, and just say that we're going to dedicate this amount of time to talk about things and see where that takes us. And we had done a lot of preparatory work, as Audrey said. It was not just the map. We were basically just working on both the map and the questions and the structure for a full month before we did that retreat. So it wasn't that we just went there and we started randomly talking. And yeah, I will agree that being in a village in Greece, on an island, in a village that is not necessarily like the most touristic place on the island, and being in a completely different reality with other rhythms, puts you out of your comfort zone in many ways and makes you want to reevaluate things about your life and the things that you're doing. Hence, I think that the commons there are very different than the commons here and the commons in the academy. And certainly, like the beach, the sun, the wind, everything contributed to our conversations, I think. And also in the translations and mistranslations of these conversations, which were also interesting, because we decided to use my recorder. I have an Android phone, so we used my Google recorder to record these conversations, and then that creates a text transcript of the conversations. And so there was a lot of misinterpretation that happened in the algorithm from the oral conversation to the text transcription, that when we were creating the zine made us again reevaluate what we wanted to say, what we were talking about in that moment that we're having the conversation, and how we wanted to actually translate that into the written text that would be like a way of us communicating the project to a wider public.
Right. I mean, that's interesting to use the mistranslations as sites for reevaluating, rethinking, or continuing the conversation in one sense. I think that's, but one of the things it seems to me that I picked up from the zine, which I thought was interesting, was your focus also on the unintentional things in the recordings, right? Did the Google recorder pick up the wind and other things? Talk to me about this sort of background sound, which I think is one of your projects, I think, and its role as one of the sites of soft data, I suppose. What do you think is the relationship between background sound, mistranslation, and this project that you're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of building off of what Afroditi was saying, definitely the recordings had the wind in them. And so many times it's kind of covering up our voice. And so, of course, then the machine learning and the algorithm have trouble translate or transcribing what it is that we are saying. What I think is interesting to me is that we came back from Greece, and then we started to put the first zine together, going back through both the transcript and listening at the same time to see where the mistranslations had been happening or the mistranscriptions have been happening. And we've been working on that one for a while, and then eventually we were ready to do zine 2 and 3. And by then it had been it had been many months after the Greece trip. And so listening back, like reading, made us focus on the ideas and the conceptual. But for me, listening back reminded me of how it felt in that moment. Then like the background noise reminds you, oh yeah, there were waves. Oh yes, there was like people walked by. Oh yes, I remember the tree that we were sitting under because it was too sunny and we needed shade. And so, you can't hear the shade, but you can hear maybe the branches or the leaves. And so I think that the background noise is what gives you the bigger story, right? Like it's what gives you more of the context. It gives you the texture of what it was like.
That's the earth, space, and body question, yes?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, your sort of section on earth, space, and body, that's the earth talking with the wind.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Afroditi has many projects that are about our life on this planet. And so I think the earth and the space is also in connection to that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, what Audrey is saying about the recordings recreating the experience for us, or like triggering memories, and I don't know, like generating this sort of illusionary space where it's like inhabited by both our memories and the conversations and the experience and the reminiscing of the retreat. But also, I think your question relates to the actual projects that we're talking about in the second zine, Air, Space, and Body, and how the background noise of certain projects becomes like the main topic of exploration of our experience on this planet. Like, for example, through my project Listening Space and my collaboration with French artist Audrey Desjardins, where we're recording the passing of weather satellites and the transmissions that they send to the broadcast to our planet every time they pass on top of our heads, and also the background noise of those transmissions. Or other projects, like in the collaborative project that Audrey talked about, the Voices and Voids, I think this background noise is something that we explored in a few vignettes, I think, where when we tried to reclaim and re-examine this data that come from voice assistants, we actually hired people that work for Amazon Mechanical Turk, so ghost workers, and we bought their data, and their data were basically recordings of things that they had asked to their voice assistants. And so in the background, you could hear the space or what they were doing when they were asking those questions. So you could very clearly understand a lot more about their lives than just, the question that they asked. So there's all this kind of like information that is not necessarily related to the immediate data that we wanted to collect, but it's actually like gleaned from those recordings. And so in collaboration with a composer, I think Danny, we made a vignette where it was just a composition of the background noises of those recordings. Or there's another one from Your Device, which was like an interactive sort of like walkthrough of different recordings that you could like create your own sound art composition by playing them. And again, like the background noise is as important as the question that is being asked.
I think what's interesting with that is that we as humans can both listen to these two things, the question asked and the background noise, and
Right.
then we can make, however, whatever understanding or meaning out of these two things combined. But how the voice assistant works is that it completely erases the background noise and only uses the utterance, the question asked, as a way to then like go into the system where it's like, okay, well, now the system will answer your question or set the timer that you asked or give you that recipe, and then says it back to you. But I think it's this like really rich background that the machine completely deems as unimportant is why we wanted to work with the background noise so much in that project too.
Right. I mean, one of the interesting things that I know a little bit, I've read, just generally a little bit about, however, is that surveillance technology specializes in background noises, right? That it's able to pick up things in the background and then sort of clean them up and figure out what's going on, both visually and auditory. And that's an interesting thing, a kind of strange intersection between these two things. But let's move on to one of your other topics, the gender and body, the body angle, right? So the body as such, as physicality, as a site that resists full appropriation or penetration by data is an interesting thing to me, because the experience of being in your body is one of those things that is really difficult to capture in data anyway. But is that one of the reasons why you're interested in the body, or is the body is always necessarily also a gendered body? What is your construction of the body in this project?
I think that identifying that the topic of gender and body was kind of like a common ground between different projects that we had worked on in our labs, not just ourselves, but some of our students too. So I think it shows a tendency of, I don't know, artists and designers being really interested in exploring this idea of like the gendered or non-gendered or gender fluid self. And in my work, for example, it takes a very different perspective than in the work that some of the students are doing. So I think we were interested in like creating like this kind of umbrella term to talk about all of these different aspects of working with the body. In my case, I'm interested in the cyborg body, in the gendered body that is dictated by algorithms or algorithmic systems. And in projects like ventriloquist ontology, I explore this idea by using machine learning and natural language processing to create a new sort of language that is being spoken through involuntary body movement on a performer. But in other projects like Racquetball Score by Heidi Biggs, who was a student of both of us, who is actually Dr. Biggs right now, finished their PhD and are working on their postdoc at the moment. They were interested in this idea of like the non-binary body and how clothing can represent that, or how like some sort of sports activity can represent that. And so they took this idea of like playing racquetball as a way of examining the non-binary body, and they created a garment that would explore that while playing racquetball, and they did a series of performances.
So illustrate that for me. Like, what did that garment do, and how was it sort of connected to or resistant to data, big data, hard data?
I can talk about that, and then maybe Audrey, you can talk about the other project that you did with Brian Kinney, which I think also deals with the body in a very different way. Yeah, so in Heidi's project, they hacked an existing pair of cargo shorts that was made from like a, I don't know, like a material that was like this polyester fabric that was actually very noisy. Like, this fabric that when you like rub together, it makes almost like a folding paper sound almost.
Okay. Okay.
And so they placed a contact microphone on the part that is between their thighs, and that contact microphone was connected wirelessly with an amplifier and a small mixer and a series of distort pedals and delay pedals. And so they were playing racquetball. They did two performances here in Seattle. One was during a symposium that we co-organized with Audrey and Daniela Rosner from HCD called Design Trouble, which was actually took place at the atrium of Gould Hall. So Heidi's performance was there, the first performance, and they were playing racquetball with this pair of shorts, and the noise that their thighs were making would be amplified and distorted, together with like them working on a continuous effort to like beat the limitations of like working out and like getting sweaty and running around, and sort of like, I don't know, like breaking down this concept of femininity, or like re-examining what this noise was creating, right? And the second performance they did was actually at On the Boards here in Seattle, again, a performance space in Lower Queen Anne, which was, I mean, similar in terms of like the technology and the sonic result, but very different visually, just because the space was this like black box and there was a spotlight on them. And so they became kind of like the subject that was very clearly examined in the space, whereas in the other space it was just like this chaotic kind of, I don't know, chaotic structure in a very big architectural environment. In both performances, I think the idea was, how can we re-examine this idea of identity, gender identity, through movement, noise, and the clothes that we wear.
I think it's really interesting because in that project with Heidi, it's really about using the signal as a way to kind of amplify questions about gender in a way, as kind of like to bring that to the space to really examine gender fluidity. And the other project that Afroditi mentioned with Brian Keeney and Daniela Rosner, the project is called Sonic Technologies of a Queer Breakup. And Brian Keeney set out to investigate how would Alexa understand relationships that are not monogamous and that are not heterosexual. And so really kind of questioning, does Alexa understand queer relationships? And so they developed a methodology called auto-speculation, in which they use their own data to kind of speculate about what their relationship with this device is, and with the data archive as well. And so,
by own data, you mean the data we can ask Alexa to give on us?
Yeah. So Alexa,
okay,
well, also the voice archive.
Yeah.
And the project started when, they were in a relationship, and then midway through the project, they experienced a breakup. And so then it became an investigation of, well, what does Alexa know about love, and how does that relate to both gender identity and types of relationships?
And what did they find? What does Alexa know?
It was a mix, so definitely Alexa has mononormative ways of understanding love, thinking that love is always between two people. And, so it has, this, when you're asking Alexa, like, what is love, then it doesn't have very expansive definitions. However, some of the advice that were given, which were still very normative in a way, were helpful. So for example, like, what should I do? I'm in a breakup. Alexa responded something like, go on a walk, talk to a friend, take time for yourself. And Brian that was kind of a relevant advice. At the same time, when they were going back through the archive, there was, again, this background noise that came back, right? So it was kind of like them asking Alexa questions, but then they heard in the back that they had been listening to the news when this was happening, and the news was about an incident that had happened in a gay bar in Seattle, Capitol Hill. And so then that reminded them of that part of their relationship. And so there was really a heaviness in going back again and again to the archive, as it was kind of like both. In the beginning, it felt therapeutic, as like, oh, I'm like reflecting on my own relationship and kind of coming to terms with that. But then further along as we came in the project, they didn't want to look at the data anymore. And so that was a really interesting transition between kind of feeling like this was a helpful look back to then feeling like this was harmful. And so I think in this idea that getting close to your data or using your own data as a way to reflect on yourself or your relationship is always a good thing. They brought up a lot of, just clarified some of the risks that have, in particular with, identities or relationship types that are not, considered the norm, or that the Alexa or the technology in that case sees as the norm, because then you're kind of always encountering something that doesn't fit your own life or your own identity.
Right. I wonder, I just want to pick your brain on what you think about AI and Chat GPT in this context. Because Alexa, is good, but Alexa is not anywhere near as quote unquote powerful as AI or Chat GPT universe. And my sense, without having actually done this, is that if I ask ChatGPT to create a polyamorous queer novel outline, it might do quite okay, given the sort of huge amount of literature that it's likely to have been trained on this topic. But what do you think about that? Are you going to push back and say, no, that's not true?
I haven't asked ChatGPT that specific question, but I think parts of ChatGPT, if you ask it very specific questions, will be able to produce something that is close to that space. I think the challenge with Alexa is that you're not going to be asking Alexa, what do I do in this? I've been through a breakup. In that moment, you maybe don't feel like you want to explain all the qualifications of your relationship. I think the challenge is in the assumption that, and the context in which you ask questions. So I think, of course, if you're ultra specific, maybe. I think the other challenge is that Alexa, has a very large amount of pre-written answers. And so a lot of, building the personality of Alexa is a huge part of the job that Amazon took on. And so, of course, a lot of this is pre-scripted. And so in that case, it's not very flexible as much as ChatGPT would be.
Right. Yeah, but I guess what I'm asking is, has ChatGPT exposed the limitations of Alexa and moved beyond it?
Mm. I don't think that these two things are the same. They're very different, and like as tools, they're very different too. I mean, Alexa is a voice assistant whose job is to, its ultimate goal is to make you buy Amazon products. So, right, every time you ask something, it will recommend you, one way or another, it will take you to something that you can buy on Amazon. Ultimately, that is where everything is heading for it. But it can also help you control things in your home and stuff like that, right? ChatGPT or GPT-4 or 5, the purpose is to create a very a chatbot basically that is as close to what we understand as intelligence, right? That's the purpose of it, at least. I think that ChatGPT is very good at making stylistic choices that look and feel very good, like when you read them, but content-wise, it's shallow because, there's that lack of making connections in the way that the human brain makes connections and creates depth. So the GPT language models are great if you have like a very specific data set that you train them on and you want them to create something that is stylistically very close to that, which in my opinion creates a lot of questions about intellectual property, basically, on all of these people that have created the data set that these models are trained in, especially when we're talking about what you mentioned, like writing a polyamorous novel, right? A polyamorous novel or polyamorous science fiction novel, right?
Yeah.
It will take things from very specific sources if stylistically you want to create that. And so it will kind of imitate the style of certain writers who have not even been acknowledged as being part of the data set on the first place. So I find it extremely problematic. I think that it's a tool with huge potential, but very problematic in the way that it's currently trained and used.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a really problem zone. So, I mean, as we move towards the end of our conversation here, I wonder if you would try and link your interest in producing the commons or common space between people and this defense of private property and intellectual property. In general, the commons is about critiquing private ownership, yes? Or is this too much of a simplification? How would you sort of bring those two into... Okay, here's provocatively. Isn't ChatGPT therefore producing something like commons by using all these sort of sources? This is purely a provocation. I'm not a... Yeah.
I mean, where's the sense of community with what ChatGPT is creating? Where are the commons there? We're talking about
in its syntax, in its sort of use of so many languages and seaming them together, it's producing a virtual commons which we can all use and access.
But have people that have been part of the training data set, have people agreed to be part of that model or machine or creation? In the creation of commons as a community, people are connecting and they're acknowledging each other, and there's this sort of network of exchange that's being created where all parties are contributing either equally or to the degree that they agree to contribute. And I feel like that is absolutely lacking in these natural language systems so far. People are using them a lot, but there's a big problematic as to where the data is coming from in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know where the data is coming from, or, what are the training sets, how they're obtaining these databases. But seems like, the big institutions own a lot of this data already. I mean, I have no idea how this works, so I completely agree, So what I'm hearing you say is the key question is, what is the data that they're being trained on, and what are the sort of processes of consent and active engagement by the creators of the original data in the production of the algorithms of natural language processing systems like ChatGPT 4.5.
And the level of transparency too.
Yeah, well, nobody knows how AI works. It's like even the engineers only have a partial idea from what I understand. Is that true or false?
Yes and no. To a certain degree they do, but yeah, when systems become super complex, then they don't necessarily know how things are being pulled. I don't know, but I think that our project has to do with this idea of like creating tactics to rethink this sort of technological present and future that we currently live in. And even the decision of making an old school paper zine, sharing these ideas in a very kind of like low cost DIY way, making limited copies and making something bespoke, I think, which is characteristic also of our work in general, which is always in like small quantities, very specific, very local. It has to do with like also reclaiming a sort of slow way of living in a sense, or like trying to understand how we can, I don't know, reimagine technology, how technology can look and feel like differently than how it does right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's in the project definitely a desire to be clear that like we made this by hand and it came from these conversations we had, and so it's a very different type of knowledge exchange than if you think about ChatGPT, which is like this kind of all-seeing, all-encompassing view that you don't really know from where. You also know it's kind of from everywhere. And so for us, the positionality and the voices that are there are much more clear. And I think we took good care in each of the zines to have very explicit credits at the end, also to say like these are not our own, we're not the only two who made these projects. Clearly, this was with all these other collaborators. And so it was very important, I think, for us to say the work that is coming out of our two labs is not our work, it's our collective work. And I think, I agree with what Afroditi is saying with ChatGPT, like you have no accountability and no credits.
Right. Yeah. No, it's frightening. It's frightening and really uncertain. So, I think that's from my perspective, one of the critical importance of your work is that it is starting to think about and produce the kinds of places, spaces, objects, experiences that are potentially sites where if you like, second front to the big data universe can be opened up. So I think that's what's incredibly important about the work that you're doing. So thank you for doing that. And I hope that in some way, because I tend to think that what I'm interested in is also how, in a sense, the physicality of architecture also can function in those registers, Of course, architecture is just data in one sense. If you're looking at, building construction processes and use of buildings and, the way we produce sustainability sort of matrices of building, it's all data. But there is also a different sense in which architecture's thingness and its relationship to the body's thingness also constitutes, along with the idea of experience, and things like background noise that you're talking about. And I suppose the fabrics that we put on our bodies and the way we organize things, that has the potential to be to function in a similar site. So thank you for helping me think about these new possibilities of being. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us and asking the provocative questions, and also bringing us back to the beach in Greece. What I like about this collaboration and this project is that it's ongoingly allowing us to reflect and see our practices in different ways. So appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Mary Lee. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.